You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast. My name is Brady, joined once again in our elaborate studio by Billy Galanko. How you doing, Billy?
Doing well. I'm excited for this upcoming weekend, and I had a great Labor Day weekend. Did you do anything fun?
What did we do? Let's see. Yep. Well, my wife says we have a lot of family reunions on my side of the family, which I don't know if we do or don't. It's all I've ever known. But we had one. We have one every year on the Sunday before Labor Day. So we did that, and it was super hot, so didn't really drink anything but water. Oh, that's not true, actually. Had a White Claw, black cherry White Claw while we were there. So I'll upload tasting notes for that after this.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I did not have a White Claw, but we went up to Sonoma last week. But before that, we didn't head up until Saturday. So on Friday, I actually did a tasting here. Had some Tuscan wines, which was kind of an interesting exploration. It was a Chianti Classico and a couple Super Tuscans, actually produced by Tenuta San Guido, which makes Sassicaia. They have like 4 wines. So one was, I'll have like the note for it, but one was like basically the baby Sassicaia from like young Sassicaia vines. And then another one was a different blend. And then there was a couple of Brunello de Montalcinos, which were really neat, actually. I've never quite like fallen in love with Brunello de Montalcinos as much as some people, but one of these ones that I had that day was really cool. So I'll add that note to the doc that is still coming. We will have it someday linked in our notes here. But yeah, that was really interesting. And then we went up to Sonoma. We did a couple tastings. The second one was more it was the Russian River vineyards. It was more for the view and the ambiance on the way home from floating the Russian River than the wines. But we also went to Abbott's Passage, which is the sister winery to Gunlock Bundschuh, which is one of the oldest wineries in Sonoma. Very well known. This place, it was one of the Bundschuh family members. One of the daughters started her own winery. She's a winemaker, and then basically this is her project. And it's really cool because she has a passion for combining. She has a passion for Rhone style wine, so she makes she had like a GSM and some stuff like that. But she also combines random varieties that she thinks would make unique blends. So we had like a Sauvignon Blanc Muscat combo that was really cool. And a couple other things, but the property is surrounded by Zinfandel vines that were planted in the 1940s. So they're about 80 years old, and the winery building itself was built in 1863, which is really neat. And there was
oldest building in California, has to be.
No, it is one of those older. It was definitely one of the oldest winery buildings around. I don't know if they said it was the oldest still standing. I don't think so, but like it was one of the OGs there. So that was really neat. I'm a big wine history guy. We were just down the road from the Bedrock vineyard where they make some of their heritage cuvee from. So that was really cool. There was like a tree there from the 1600s that apparently the guy, Jack London, who wrote Call of the Wild, used to like lean against while he would be writing and doing his thing. So that was a really cool tasting. And the wines were great too. I didn't really take notes because we were with friends, but it was a cool overall setting. So that was quite the weekend.
Nice. Yeah. Back on the Sassicaia, baby Sassicaia. Is that like young vines from like a newly planted block in the same vineyards, or are they totally different vineyards, like different areas, or is it basically Sassicaia?
From what I understand, it was young vines, same vineyard. I specifically asked the guy. He said yes, he thinks so, but he didn't sound very confident when he said yes. So I'm going to have to verify, but I've read about the wine prior to that And I had heard that it's mostly young vines, but
Yeah,
I
it's
will get
not a
back to you on
not a
that.
distributor tasting if there's not a few lies
Well, it was
or
that this was
accidental
just
influence.
this was actually just a K&L employee. So
Okay.
I would hope that they would, but normally they have like in-depth tasting notes for each, like the tech sheets for each wine. And so I looked it up on my phone. I think that's what it was, but I was in a hurry because, my fiance wanted me to get back from tasting and do other things. So I whizzed through the wines, but it was fun because in a test setting too, you got to be pretty quick on your tasting anyway. So it's actually helpful.
Yeah, so
So
you've been generally taking more notes when you're tasting though?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this has been, and also what I try to do is, they have like a stand. I'll get my wine. I'll go over to the corner and kind of run through everything, sight to smell to the palate and all that. And then I'll ask them a little bit more about like how it was made and stuff like um, after I taste. So I can hopefully kind of put things together rather than be directed by their description of the wine and go through. So
Yeah.
it's just
Nice.
long-term blind tasting training, prepping for years to come.
Nice. Yeah, I've been going back to my notebook too once you kind of started this the notes writing blog for the podcast. So that's been helpful. I did it with some whiskeys too the other day, which we'll share. And actually we have those guys of the whiskeys that I tried coming on the podcast, so we won't spoil anything, but notes to come. Um yeah. Anything else that you're looking forward to this week wine wise?
Yeah, I mean, why don't we just lean right into the what we are drinking, because I think it's going
Yep.
to combine. So this week's what we're drinking is Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. And I don't. Are you familiar at all with this wine? I think the name is kind of confuses people sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd throw in the category of maybe have had, but wouldn't be able to say anything.
Yeah, so some people confuse it with Brunello di Montalcino, which I mentioned earlier, which is made of Sangiovese. There's actually an area south of Tuscany, or I don't know if it's considered part of Tuscany, but that's called Montepulciano di Vino di Nobile, but that's a region. So what I'm talking about today is Montepulciano, which is a grape from the area called d'Abruzzo, or it's called Abruzzo. The D means from Abruzzo. But this wine has two special things for me. One, aside from like the very first wine I could ever remember that I had in college, was a wine from this area, was the first one that I actually like sought out by name. I was like, I think this is a good producer. It was called, I said Maschiarelli. I think I'm looking now. I think it probably should be pronounced Maschiarelli. But it's basically a really interesting region because it's like a fruit forward, but yet a little bit of depth and good acid red wine. They tend to be very affordable. I've always kind of liked them more than the Tuscan wines, the Chiantis, and those. I guess there is more flesh and a little juicier, maybe less sandy tannin than some of the Sangiovese based wines. But what I've been really thinking about for years, and I really love, is these obscure regions that happen to have like these icon cult wines. So in Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, like in Abruzzo, there's a producer called Emilio Pepe. And when I first started working at Vint and we started up the marketplace, Adam had mentioned that there is basically like some top wines, and he's like, oh, some people order these and that, and then somebody ordered this expensive wine from Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, and I was like, what is this? And it turns out it's just an iconic producer. He sources, he harvests by hand. He does a lot of hand sorting. Apparently, he ages in bottle, but not the final bottle. So what he'll do is he'll fill the bottles with wine, lay them down to age, and then he'll rack out of the bottle. So he'll pour from one bottle into another bottle
Huh.
and get it off the sediment. And I was like, that's crazy. That explains why his wines, and they aren't really even that expensive in the grand scheme of things. So I think they're between $100 and $200 per bottle. So it's my birthday is coming up on Sunday. I reached out to past guest Jordan Ogron, who runs the Test restaurant out here, and the Boutier bottle shop. And I was basically like, here's some things I want. or I want to have a couple of special bottles, but not like crazy expensive for my birthday. Like basically, he's kind of a master of these amazing producers that are not crazy expensive, but they're really not top notch like global wines. So the first wine he suggested was the Emilia Pepe 2013. So God willing, he will have it, and we will have that on Friday.
Oh, nice. So he's sourcing it all for you?
Yeah, it's all in his shop there, which is actually connected to the restaurant, which I'm hoping there might not be a corkage on top. But his like MO, he really likes Italian wines as well as Spanish and some other things. There's like the best wines from these regions that are either undervalued as a whole or kind of basically just like really like world-class wines that tend to be overlooked by most people. Like he does have the Burgundies and the Bordeaux as well, but like he's really good at finding some of these ones that are, not going to break the bank, but are basically the same caliber wines as, some of the best in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we talk about it often with guests. That's really the secret sauce, is being able to identify wines that have a maybe similar story, maybe not similar brand story, but similar story of place and legacy as the huge producers, but you can get at value. That sounds like really cool stuff. Does he have that all the time, or does he have to bring it in?
I don't know. That's the interesting thing about his wine shop is they don't have their inventory listed online. So basically he relies on this like very bespoke, high touch relationship. So like the shop is really nice, but he really wants people to come in and have a conversation and then help direct them, rather than just, kind of buy and then he has to ship. So not exactly sure how he manages the inventory, but I know you can find some on the Vint Marketplace because people keep buying it and rubbing it in that I haven't had it yet. So
Nice.
It's a thing.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I think well, Jordan and I on our marketing team are going to Cincinnati this week. I need to figure out what bottle I'm gonna bring to that. Have some late night hotel escapades with a bottle, maybe. Jordan's tastes. He'll want something expensive.
That'll be nice. Yeah, I actually promised him I might bring a half bottle of Montebello for us to share.
He mentioned that the other day. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm glad he's already telling you on that. But I don't know. I felt bad when we did some other tasting note for for something last week, and he's like, someday I'll try some MB, and I was like, what the hell is MB? I was like, oh, Montebello. I was like, I can help you out. I think I can share one of these. So
nice. Yeah, I should have my my 2020 coming here soon, but the weather's pretty rough, so they delayed shipping on me.
Yeah, I heard we don't need to get into our weather talk, but it's over 90 degrees there, so or over 100 almost. So Good luck with that.
Well, let's jump to our guest today. It was really great to have Cristie Norman on, who I know you've been connected with for a little bit. My first time meeting her, but Cristie Norman was actually Wine Educator of the Year, 40 under 40 for Wine Enthusiast in 2020. Currently, she is the lead sommelier at the Wynn in Las Vegas, and she's also the sorry about that. She's the president of United Somms, the United Sommeliers Foundation, which is really, I think, the heart of our conversation with her, and the heart of the way that she approaches the industry is really around building community, especially around education for everybody from first year sommeliers, folks who are trying to break into the industry, all the way up to, folks who have been more ingrained in the industry as distributors, producers, importers, really trying to bring everyone together on the same page around education. And yeah, she's got a ton of energy. She cares about being a somm the right way, quote unquote. We talk about that a little bit. And I think she's great perspective to have on this kind of new generation of somms.
Yeah, no, she's great. I think she's focused at like the Delilah restaurant within the Wynn. I think is her main territory. We didn't really get into what else she might be doing at the Wynn as a whole, but yeah, Cristie's amazing. I first connected with her multiple years ago when I was in LA trying to basically connect deeper with the wine community here. So I joined the LA Somm group. She helped organize these tastings, which basically her and her bottle squad would take bottles of wine and literally fill these little I don't know what you want to call them. They're not ampules, but basically these little bottles, and create little kits for everybody to come out and blind taste on their own or with the group. So she's really done a lot to kind of, number one, build community, and two, educate. So it's been great to see her see continued success and get to go to the Wynn and be so recognized over the past couple of years. So I hope everybody enjoys the conversation and feeds off her energy as much as we do.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Here is our interview with Cristie Norman.
All right, we are here with Cristie Norman, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, I think, multiple times here in LA during the wine tasting, blind tasting stuff during COVID and other times. So thank you so much for joining, Cristie.
Thank you so much for having me, Billy. It's so great to see your face, and nice to meet you, Brady.
Yeah, Cristie, we when we talk to different somms, everyone seems to have like a really roundabout and interesting way of getting to the wine industry. I assume you have a story like that as well, or maybe Billy already knows it, but maybe you can share with our audience how you kind of got involved in wine and the somm community.
Yeah, well, when I was 15, I was working at a tea house in Valencia, California, where I grew up. It's a little small town. There's a big theme park there called Magic Mountain, so everyone knows the city because of that. Pretty much everyone worked there when you were a teenager. But I worked at this tea house, and my job was to recommend one of 200 teas to guests that were dining there, and it was a very casual place, but it really set me up now looking back for what I do now, because it's very similar. There's a lot of similarities with tea and wine. So tea has a caffeine level. Alcohol doesn't have that, but it has alcohol in it, right? A percentage of alcohol. There's different varieties. They come from different countries. They're just different aromas. So there's a lot of similarities now looking back. And I started working at this place called Lucille's Barbecue. It was a very difficult job. It's actually the hardest job that I've ever had to this day. And I really wanted to work at the steakhouse. And there was one fancy steakhouse in this small town that I lived in. And it was kind of similar to Mastro's or Morton's type of environment. And I was 18 and I really wanted to work there. And so I started learning about wine because I heard that the GM was a sommelier and he really cared about wine. So I started reading a bunch of books, including Kevin Rawley's Window to the World. I think that's a great book, Wine for Dummies. I mean, and anything that I could get my hands on, I was reading. And I walked into the steakhouse and told them, I'm actually still friends with the guy that gave me my initial interview. His name's Eric. He was the AGM. And I said, I want to be the best server that you guys have ever had. And I had been, I was serving. I was a corporate trainer for Lucille's. And so I thought that I could do it. I had the work ethic. And he kind of laughed and said, okay, well, you can start as a bar back. So I was mopping the floors and, cleaning out the drains at the end of the night. We had a blueberry lemon drop. And I remember, getting the muddled blueberry out every night. And I just kept learning about wine. And really I used it at first as a leverage point. So I said, if I take my certified sommelier, or my first level sommelier exam, the first one is the introductory level. If I take that exam, will you make me a server full time? Because I had gotten promoted from bar back to expediter to lead expediter and then to a server, but I was half and half. And I really wanted to be a server full time. And so they said, okay, if you pass that exam, we'll make you a server full time. It's perfect. So I took the exam a couple days after my 21st birthday, and one of the master sommeliers that was proctoring the intro exam was a guy named Chris Miller, who used to be the wine director of Spago Beverly Hills. And he talked about this wine program called Spago, and I had never heard of it before. And this guy named Wolfgang Puck founded that. It was, his flagship restaurant. I kind of knew who Wolfgang was. I recognized the name, but not really. I was born in 1994. So I think, it just wasn't something generationally that I had seen. But I knew that Wolfgang Puck was a really famous chef. And so I drove, an hour to go interview at Spago. They had positions open for a hostess and a cocktail waitress, I think. So I applied for those. And I went to the bar and I just kept going in and I introduced myself and I got a couple interviews. They rejected me. I didn't have enough experience to be a server in their eyes, even though I was at this fine dining steakhouse. I'd also helped as the AGM, opening another location as well at the time. And so Spago was the only place I wanted to work. So I passed my certified exam while I was helping open another steakhouse. So we were if you've ever opened a restaurant before, it's the most stressful time ever. It's like 4 months of really, really intense stuff. And I just happened to have my certified exam already scheduled. So I went ahead and did it anyway, and I passed somehow. I was 21, and then Spago hired me shortly after. And there were a lot of people. I'm actually friends with some of the people now that were interviewing at the exact same time for the same role. And they chose me because I had no bad habits. And the somms, Philip Dunn and Rena Bustle, were really, really experienced, and they felt like they could grow and nurture me. And, truly all I did was just run bottles and, put away wine for the first year, clean decanters. That was my job.
Yeah, that's you went right from 18, I guess, out of high school. Was college not on the table? Didn't consider it because you jumped right in. What was kind of the
so
what was the
I was
thought process
actually,
behind this is what
I
I want to do?
graduated high school early. So I had been working
Wow.
on a degree in economics and accounting.
Hmm.
And so I have I have a double A in those.
So on that front, though, switching back to what you're actually, how we met in the first place, is there is a lack of kind of education and support. At least there was. It's constantly growing for both, the quartermaster sommelier exams to a lesser extent, but also WSET. Kind of what did that inspire you to start trying to build the community that you wanted to see? Because you've helped create the LA Somm community here. You've been working with United Somm Foundation to help support somms during the pandemic. How did your start kind of lead you into wanting to build something more for other people?
Well, at Spago Beverly Hills, we always had master sommeliers and MWs, a masters of wine, come to Spago to dinner. And I would meet them because they worked for a winery or another supplier, like an importer. And I just met so many people. And I realized that you have to taste with people that are better than you. I also completed WSET 3, and I had a study group, and, bless them. But none of them knew what they were doing, and we were all just bringing wines and just trying to figure it out. And you really have to taste with people that are better than you. And so and when I joined a tasting group with Sean brought me to the most advanced tasting group that was in Los Angeles with all these people that were studying for MS. And they looked at me and they were like, why is she here? Like, why is this girl here? She knows nothing. And then they told me to start bringing wine, and I brought the wrong wines, and I was in trouble because of that. Right. And so, what I decided to do, and I love that tasting group, and the people that are in that group are mentors for the LA Somm community now. But I started bringing mentors and bringing sommeliers, and I had appointment times for them. So if they were studying for a higher level exam, they would be in a one-on-one solo appointment slot, and I would stack them, and we would have a small group that was like certified level tasters, like people that weren't that experienced yet. And so what that ended up doing was we were able to utilize an entire bottle of wine over the course of like 4 hours, and for all these different people at different levels, in a way that made sense, because it makes more sense for somebody who's new at blind tasting to be in a group setting where they can get feedback and kind of like discuss. Whereas people who are, really advanced just need to do their timed flight of 6 wines, because that's what the exam entails when, you walk into a room and there's 6 pre-poured glasses of wine and you have to figure out the country, the vintage, the variety, etc. And so I started doing that twice a month. Spago was super supportive, and I started doing master classes there that I felt were topics that were important and cool. and things that I wanted to go to. A lot of times, really, really high end wineries, let's say, will only invite the top buyers in the city, somebody who runs like an entire hotel, and they'll all go to lunch or something, right? Whereas for my master classes, I was able to have 60 to 70 seats for people who were maybe like a floor sommelier or at this restaurant or that restaurant. And we ended up being really inclusive to a lot of the distributors who wanted to learn. They were like, hey, I really, really want to learn about Alsace or whatever. Can I please go? And I said, of course. Because it didn't make sense to me that they were not included, and at first people were like, oh, you're going to let the distributors in, you need to, they're going to try to sell you things while they're here. No, they didn't. What they did was they actually invited all of their buyers from all the high-end restaurants. So I had like the wine director of Providence and, all these like really, really cool Michelin star restaurants were at the master classes, and they were sending their somms, and it was fantastic. So it started really growing. And then when the pandemic hit, obviously, we're all at home going stir crazy. And I was like, why don't we do this virtually? And so basically I set up a drive-through pickup at my house. I would sit outside with a lawn chair and a giant igloo, one of those like ice chests. And I would divide one bottle of wine into 12 miniatures, like 2-ounce things. And I had like a little bag. It was a little clear bag. And people would come and pick it up from my house. And we would all get together and taste on Zoom with a mentor. So it was like the exact same thing. And we started doing it every week, which was crazy. So yesterday, we just did our 87th week of virtual education. So we still do this, but it expanded. We had master classes with like 120 people all tasting the same glass of wine. And these kits would go, we had like partner restaurants and locations and stuff. And so these kits would go all the way up to Santa Barbara and down to San Diego within 24 hours of the masterclass, which was crazy. So we had all these people everywhere doing these classes and tasting the wines. And it was so cool because actually during the pandemic, we were able to have people that were in France and they were talking about their wine and we're all tasting it. And it was cool because, we all had a bunch of volunteers helping. We had like a bottle squad. We did it outside with masks on, like all separated. And I called them bottle squad. And we'd have a bunch of people, helping out. And it was so cool. So that was amazing. And I was recommended for this job out here in Vegas for a restaurant called Delilah. It's owned by Hwood Group. They're an LA-based. It's not even a restaurant group. It's like a nightlife, entertainment, everything group. They have the hottest nightclubs in LA that I went to when I was 21. That I stand outside to get into. They have amazing restaurants, and Delilah and the Wynn Las Vegas, they partnered to make this beautiful, beautiful restaurant. So, and when I saw the space, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And now I'm running a wine program that does, twice as much, if not more, than Spago does, which is wild because we have a lot less inventory, but people come to Vegas to spend money and they spend it on wine. So it's completely different than any restaurant I've ever seen in my life. And it's actually very normal for wine programs here in Vegas to do 5 million plus. Like that's kind of standard for a lot of these really, really big restaurants, which is crazy because a lot of these like Michelin starred restaurants that have like a really, really big inventory and stuff don't necessarily do that much in other markets. So we're in a very unique position because people don't want to fly with wine a lot of times. And the only way you really can get here is fly unless you're driving from LA. And you don't really want to bring a bunch of fine and rare wine in the car with you. So people that might normally bring a bottle to dinner are actually buying it here. And then the United Sommeliers Foundation was started at the same time as when I started doing the virtual tastings and stuff. It was all pay what you can or free. And I just noticed talking to everybody that, it wasn't just restaurant sommeliers that were affected. Then it was like the distributors and it was everybody. It was like trickling down. And Chris Blanchard and I were going to do a masterclass in person on March 16th. And I think restaurants were shut down on the 15th of 2020, March 15th. And so the night before I had to cancel, he had to cancel his flights. And I mean, I had 60 people registered for his class, which is crazy. And he and I were chit chatting, and he was like, well, what do we do? And I said, well, let's start a GoFundMe, and like, let me call some cool people like Eric Siegelbaum and Yannick Benjamin and, Jeff Levitska and Jackson Rohrbaugh. And I just called them, and the people that I listed are, really like wine famous people, in my opinion, people that I really respect, and ended up being on the board. I didn't want to start a foundation. I actually voted against it, for the record. But Jeff Levitska recommended we file as a 501c3 and that we could get larger donations. And he was right. I was completely wrong. We got $100,000 from Co-Brand, $50,000 from Skurnik, doing a fundraiser with all of their different producers. Like, there was so much great stuff that was created from that. And we were able to essentially have one employee. Her name is Arden. She's still with us today. She's our administrative director. She's a part-time employee, and she anonymizes all the applications and sends them to voting. So she's a non-wine industry professional, and we thought that was really important. So if somebody was going through something, let's say they was diagnosed with cancer and something else happened to them in their life, they could apply and know that all of these wine people aren't going to see their name, and feel embarrassed. We thought it was really important. And a lot of times, like, I never saw any of the names of people who got funding, so we've given out 1.35. It's more now because of the Maui fires. We've been distributing to people on the island quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, that's how that started. And, just really grateful to still be involved and still be able to facilitate that work. So
That's awesome. Hey, I mean, I was trying to do some math. You had to have been doing those master classes. You were what, like 24, 25, 26?
I was 22.
When you started the master class, you were 22?
22, 23.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that? Was, not to assume that there was like an issue in the community with people saying like, who is this young person coming in? But did you experience any of that when you were like, I'm going to put on this class and I just got done doing my certified?
Yeah. However, I think at the time the Los Angeles somm community was very disjointed, and everyone felt like an outsider except for a very small group of people. It was like, there was like one like cliquey group, and everyone felt like we were on the outside of it. And so when I started doing this, I said it was open to anyone that had a wine certification, which was true. It's just like, we just happened to get like, 45 out of 60 people who are in restaurants. But yeah, I mean, I felt that on Instagram. I had started like a wine Instagram, and, I learned, about social media and kind of about like how to be an influencer, and the wine industry is kind of like behind all of technology. So I was like maybe 4 to 5 years earlier, like I'm like one of like the first kind of people who was an actual professional and like a wine influencer. And that was very triggering for a lot of people. And there were like Facebook groups where they would put my face, and hundreds of people would just like bash it on the internet. Like, that was a real thing. Or just like call me a slut and like all these mean names because I had like a dress on and my legs were showing. Like, it's not like I was being super provocative or anything. Oh, and I also did a bikini competition, so I was like doing bodybuilding stuff, and like, obviously like you're showing your body in a bikini because you're proud of it. And I did like 20 weeks of like a prep, and I dehydrated myself and, paid all this money to do this thing. And people just tore me apart. It was crazy. But ultimately, like, I think a lot of people identified with me, and now as I've gotten older, I'm 29 now, and there's so many women that were like, you inspired me to be able to do things that I wanted, and that I didn't have to only post about wine. Because at the time people were very, very professional on Instagram, and, I'm professional, but I also show my personality and my authentic self, which I think people gravitated towards. And a lot of people joined my tasting group. Some of the best people in my tasting group, my most loyal volunteers and friends, and all of those people I found on Instagram. They found me, and you find your people. I'm sure there were some people who were pissed about my master classes, but I didn't really hear about it. I pissed everybody off when I told them that they had to be on time and be their word. Cause, there was a distributor, or no, I'm sorry. It's a winemaker, and he coordinates events in LA, and someone I really respect a lot. And he had a lunch at the Montage Hotel. It was the Montage at the time. And he had 20 buyers that were RSVP'd for that event, and only 8 showed up.
Wow.
And that was very common at the time. And so when I started my master classes, I pissed off so many people because I was like, my request of you is to be on time and be your word. Like, if you're going to be late, let me know. It doesn't seem like that difficult, but for wine people who have never been held accountable, and I wasn't trying to sell them anything. I was just a somm that was trying to do something nice. And if I have this super high-end winery that's donating all this wine to do this class, and I have a wait list of 15 people and you don't show up, that's disrespectful, in my opinion. Like, 100%. They're like, you have 3 calendar invites, like you have 4 reminders that I set out, like, and I would tell people, like, hey, like, are you okay, first of all? But a lot of times it was just like, oh yeah, I just forgot. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, if that happened twice, then I would actually kick them out for a period of time. So I would give them a break. And it's so funny because I only had to do that to 2 people. And one of them was habitually, like, known to be late or not show up to everything. Like, he would RSVP to stuff. And he went around town talking so much shit about me because I kicked him out for being late and not showing up. And it actually brought like 15 people to my group because they were like, oh my God, thank you so much for holding this guy accountable. Nobody does. And it's so crazy. And I really don't care if people are like a minute late. It's just like a different mentality. It's just like, do I value this thing that I'm doing? And am I going to pay respect to that? And the whole reason was so that we could start on time. I hate going to events and I show up on time and then it's like 45 minutes of just like mingling. Oh, we're going to wait for all these people to show up. And then now I've been there for 3.5 hours. Like, there's absolutely no reason that we need to do that. So like, we show up, we start on time, we end on time. That was my commitment. And it worked both ways. So
I've been trying to start a little like wine society, educational wine group in my neighborhood, and we're trying to do it quarterly. And the first quarter of this year, we had 12 people RSVP and 2 showed up, and no one kind of had, gave indication, like you said. That's super frustrating. So I definitely resonate with you, and we're doing it at a much larger scale than that. But yeah, it's tough, especially when something like you said, you lined someone up, or in my case had opened a bunch of wine and bought food and stuff. So yeah, definitely resonate. When people were joining your group, it sounds like you had folks kind of from across the industry, across experience levels, all different ages. Is that right? And when you think about maybe the differences in culture between, just say, sommeliers who've come up in the last 8 or 10 years versus those of like the prior years, are there differences culturally in the way that folks share information, or the way that like cliques and groups are formed, or just what are some of those cultural differences and expectations that you think between age groups?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, if you were, I would say older than like 40 right now in the industry, it's a very different, very always keeping it super professional, not wanting to show who you are, lots of bottle shots on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think the people who are coming up now are like not only just challenging the views that we had about wine in the past, but also a lot of them are not able to try high-end, expensive wine because it's gotten astronomically more expensive. And, I don't want to get into this a lot, but, in terms of like natural wine and what's going on with that movement, I think, a lot of it makes the wine world seem a little bit smaller. And I think it's easier for people to understand, maybe if they're new, and it's accessible. And I think that's fantastic. And if that gets somebody into the wine industry, like, awesome. But it's interesting because some people are really narrowly focused on that one specific category and like that type of branding. And there's a lot of other stuff to learn. So I think it's like, how can you learn about all these classic producers and classic regions when like, Village Chablis is like $30 a bottle wholesale,
Yeah.
right? It's getting kind of insane. And it obviously depends on what state you're in and whatnot. I think in California it was much more accessible. But yeah, in terms of different age groups, completely different outlook on the wine industry and very conservative. And I had a lot of people who I considered mentors in my life tell me like, ooh, you should probably, not talk about that, or, maybe not say that, maybe not wear that. And I just didn't care at one point. I mean,
those are like wine opinions, right? Like, don't say that about wine. Or are you talking like political, social stances or stuff like that?
My personal life.
Oh, okay.
My personal life. And I think there was a lot less oversight. I think now there's much more accountability for like gross people's behavior, right? And, I got a full scholarship to a wine conference when I was 22. And my boss told me I had to work and he wouldn't give me the time off. And I was so pissed. And it was a wine conference outside of California. And I'm like, everything's paid for. Like, I got a full conference pass. Like, what do you mean? And a couple of years later, there's some individuals who are known to be like predatory in the industry. It kind of came out, right? And he was like, yeah, that's why I didn't let you go to that conference, because I always heard like, weird stuff would happen there or whatever. And I think now with like the internet and social media, there's much more accountability, and, people will call people out for gross things. But, I've definitely been in some situations that I didn't feel 100% comfortable, in the wine industry, because, you want to make connections and you want to network and stuff like that. But I think that's why ultimately I brought it to me instead of me having to like go and seek it out in these like weird situations, because, I'm a young woman in the industry. And like I said, I was 22, 23 when I was really coming up and learning and like kind of out in wine society, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And at least, I was doing it at my restaurant where I worked, and I was safe, and I made the rules, and this was my playground, and everyone would be safe and kind and inclusive. And, we weren't going to let somebody who's a negative Nancy like continue to be there. Like, I've literally talked to people like, yo, what's up? Are you okay? Like, what's happening here? Like, if you're going to be a grouch, then you got to go.
I can't think of any other like hobby or interest that I have where the community around it can be so different depending on where you're at. Yeah, I played things like tennis and pickleball and like group sports and stuff like that. And it's pretty much the same culture everywhere you go. But in wine, you can meet like the coolest people ever in one group. And then you go to like some other dinner and it's like just the weirdest, stodgiest, just most counter to that culture ever. And I think that seems like it's sort of unique, in wine, at least in the kind of communities that I'm in.
Yeah, there's a lot of really smart people, sometimes are not the most socially adept, right? And that's okay. And we love our awkward friends. I'm a little awkward, and it's a funny thing because you get all these people together and they are all so different and they all have different backgrounds and whatnot. But I'm really excited for kind of my generation to start leading a lot of the events and be the predominant voice in the industry. Because again, I think we challenge a lot of narratives that there has been. We're creating things, we're pushing to see wine differently, and talk about the tough things. I mean, I had a woman who's about my age. I had a Bordeaux producer or something. It was like a French producer of some sort. And they were giving a presentation, a masterclass, and they raised their hand and she goes, she was like, where are you sourcing your labor from for the vineyards? Like in front of this whole class.
Wow.
And they were like, what? And they're like, well, are you, like, are the workers, there just for the harvest, or do you employ them, around the year? And I was like, whoa, this is real. This was a real class. I don't know if Billy, if you were there, but I remember that. And I gave her some feedback afterwards, like, hey, make sure the delivery is like, make it in a positive way. Cause I think it kind of felt like I gotcha. But I was like, damn, she had the balls to say that. And and now forever, that producer, when they got into the market, at least in California, will be like, we need to have a good answer for these labor practices, right? And that would never be appropriate in the generation that came before us, ever.
Yeah.
No one would ever disrespect the winemaker that way, right?
On that note, do you think, I had like two questions or lines of question, I guess, social media. One is like people out there just trying to be like influencers who know nothing about wine. They're kind of just like shilling, anything that people will pay them money to like hold. But then the other side that I think is really exciting is, like, to your point there, like transparency and like more access to these producers. And like you even see now, like Bordeaux, even the top producers are needing to post like what they're doing and like some behind the scenes stuff. Do you think like that our generation is kind of pushing them to either like, more transparency on the sustainability side of things, that interest in more obscure varieties, now that we can actually see, a small producer in like Campania making something out of Elianico, in the vineyard? Do you think like social media is kind of helping drive that progress forward? Or the internet?
I think so. I mean, I think just the internet is helping drive that forward. And, I thought that some wine influencers didn't really know anything. And when I went on a trip last year, I was talking to them and they were like, oh yeah, I was having lunch with the owner of Chateau Margaux and I went to this crazy region and this crazy region. And I was like, damn, I'm a buyer and they've gone to way more places than I've ever gone to. And they're with like the top people. I'm not talking about like, someone who's just giving them a taste in the cellar. They're meeting with the president of the organizations and stuff. And, they have 30,000 followers on Instagram, like nothing crazy, right? I mean, some of these wine influencers really know their stuff and are really, really knowledgeable. And it's a shame that people kind of like put them into a certain category. And then there are some people that just do push whatever, that people will give them money for, I think there has to be a balance. But, it's exciting for me now that I'm taken seriously as a professional. And I'm not just like a wine influencer, because I did have a great job at a real restaurant. That's a wine restaurant, right? So I was really confusing for a lot of people. And it is really exciting to be able to see what wineries are doing and whatnot. I still think that wineries are a bit averse still. The content is still very, very formal. And, I'm not seeing a whole lot of wineries that are utilizing social media super well. Like, for instance, have you ever seen the National Parks Services Instagram?
Yep.
So National Parks is like the actual government organization, like, or the agency that runs all of the national parks, and whoever's running their page is a genius and it's hilarious and they make memes and it's fantastic. And I would never follow their account, but I do because their social media is so good. And I think when the wine industry figures that out and figures out a way to merge both, that you can still be serious and have amazing wine while also being funny and engaging,
Yeah, I also just like being able to see like what my favorite people are drinking here and there. Like Raj will post like random bottles or people he's hanging out with, and it's like that's just kind of cool too, because you used to just like only get access to these folks when they're like publishing a book or if they go on a podcast or something. But now you can kind of keep up on a day-to-day too, which I think is neat.
Cristie, as we kind of come up on our time, what do you mentioned the natural wine movement and stuff like that. I'm sure you're drinking some of those wines and a lot of other stuff. What are you kind of interested in these days? And just in terms of your own exploration, and what are you buying for your own cellar?
So one of my favorite wines that I've had on my wine list for a little while is a Tribute to Grace, a Santa Barbara Grenache. It's fantastic. Like, I love Grenache just in general. I would say my favorite wine in the world is Reyes, 100% Grenache, Chateauneuf du Pape. And I just love Grenache. It's just, I don't know why. It's a thing. It's really a thing. And so all things Grenache. Trying a lot of champagne. My restaurant sells a lot of champagne. So just discovering, some smaller producers, or, trying some tête cuvées that I studied about, like Cru Claude Amenet, that I had only ever seen in flashcard until I got to try it, for the first time working at this restaurant. Right. It's funny, as Sancerre gets more ripe, I kind of like it more. I've liked Sancerre before, no shade, but as the vintages are getting warmer, I kind of like it more. It's getting a little bit like bigger. So, my house wine would probably be some type of Grenache of some sort, and Sancerre, but I'm pretty classic in the stuff that I'm usually drinking, to be honest, or a beer, Saison Dupont or Pliny the Elder, if I could ever get it.
Yeah, this is we can do beer podcast next time. 'Cause- yeah, we certainly want to have you back on, because it sounds like you're at a point in terms of your career and the different projects you're working on that things are moving really quickly. So we want to maybe be able to have you back on in the future, and you can give us some updates. And it's always interesting to talk about wine culture like then and now, and how different people are experiencing it in different parts of the world, especially in a place where, LA, which should be a central hub of these kinds of communities, you're kind of creating that. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm really
do.
grateful.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, before you go too, I just want to hear quickly about your wine judging, recent experiences in Argentina too. More out of personal curiosity.
So IWSC, the International Wine and Spirits Competition, they've been around for over 50 years. I think Steven Spurrier was one of the founders, if I'm not mistaken. And they were criticized, for basically always doing their judging in London in a room, right? And to kind of not experiencing the terroir and understanding. So they started this program where they bring buyers, sommeliers, like master sommeliers and masters of wine together, and they have a certain percentage of each that they have to have, and they bring them to the actual location. So we got to go to Mendoza and actually be in Argentina. And it also increases the amount of people who are submitting wines that can be judged, obviously, because they don't have to ship to the UK. So that was actually the biggest barrier to entry. And, obviously we got to do a lot of visits, and it was wonderful, but it was wild because I was sitting with a woman who has been a critic for 30 years. And then there's another guy who's a master of wine in Brazil who's been a critic for Decanter for many, many, many years, literally 35 years, I think. And it was 3 of us at a table. It was 3 or 4 judges at each table. There's 12 of us total. And imagine getting 12 2022 Valle de Uco Malbecs all in a row, right? Wow. And you had to score and judge them individually and write tasting notes, which I'm not used to typing. And none of the scores would be revealed until everybody put in their score. And so at the end, we're like going over, the things, and we're like, and let's say I scored something higher, and they're looking at me like, well, why did you score that wine higher? I'm like, because it was the 10th Malbec. I don't know why. And then, but then you fight for it, right? And you're like, no, I really think this is a gold. And truly, if someone gets a gold in IWSC, every single judge has to taste it. And there has to be a certain amount of agreement, and they're very serious about it. I mean, I fought for 1 gold, and they ended up bringing it around to every single table to decide whether or not it was a gold. And, I was really happy that I fought for one, and I got, and because it's really intimidating, because the easiest thing to do would just be to score lower, right? Like if you don't trust yourself, like just score a little bit lower than maybe you feel, right? So, all the blind tasting really did pay off in a professional sense. I felt really good about it, and it was very hard. I also was tasting the wine over and over, spitting, but tasting. And what I noticed was that the judges were actually rolling around the wine in their mouth, and they would only spit it out once. And that made so much more sense. I was like, yeah, how do you do this? Because I was feeling a little tipsy after the first hour. And I was spitting every single thing, but it was absorbing underneath my tongue. You know what I mean? So, but it was wonderful. And I'm looking forward to joining them in London in April, hopefully. It'll be right after my 30th birthday, but I'm going to see go there. Yeah. I've never been to London before. So, and everyone was very nice. Very different wine culture there too. We could do a whole podcast about the difference between American and, European culture just in general.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about. I mean, we haven't had someone on, I don't think, who has had so much success early on in their career in wine. as you have, and you being such a critical part in so many other people's learning and kind of developing community around wine. I think that's really awesome, especially through COVID. Billy and I were joking, is like, she's just like us, only super successful in wine. So
No.
you're we're glad
It's
to,
so weird. I don't feel like
glad.
I don't feel like I'm not successful, which is crazy. I guess I don't know. I think who you are is more important, and how you treat people in the world. And I think being really successful is like being a Forbes 30 under 30, right? Like that would be really
Sure.
successful for me. So I guess but I appreciate that. And I'm so grateful to be on here. Thank you so much for asking me to be on your podcast.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll have you back on in the future and look forward to staying in touch.
I would love to. Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. All right, that was our interview with Cristie Norman. I hope everybody learned a little bit about the world of somms, how to become one, how to support one, all of that jazz, and basically enjoyed Cristie's enthusiasm for both wine and helping other people. So go out, help a somm, help somebody else today, and we will be back with a new episode next week. Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.